Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's good to be with you here this morning. Our numbers have dwindled. Is that because it's a nice day, or this is like the remnant that remains, right? Or they're all the people that didn't get chapel credit at the beginning of semester? Is that what's going on? I think so. Yeah, so we've been on this journey this semester into navigating the unknown. So I got a text from Pastor G just late yesterday saying, hey, can you come in and step in here, because I think somebody dropped out. So I'm coming in here at the last minute to just bring you some of my thoughts about this idea of navigating the unknown, what that's looked like a little bit in my life, and how we can see that happen in the biblical text as well. But, I know that when I come, one of the things that I have to expect is that I'm going to get memed later on today, right? Does everybody follow the memes, right? I'll turn Robert. So I thought I better come prepared with some of my own today, just to be ready, right? So let's see. Yes. Well, the turntables have turned, right? There's one. Here's the second. I'll be ready this afternoon. I'll be ready. But actually, today, I didn't even bring my phone. My phone is still over here. I actually really want to talk about these devices with us just for a little bit. Where is my phone today? Here it is. These things, right? These things that we use all the time that have just become so embedded in our lives. Everybody's got one, right? I've got one. I'm not even sure that I could do my job in the same way if I don't have one of these devices anymore, right? Do you know when the first iPhone was made? You feel that it's in your life. It's like, what do you mean? They've always been around, right? 2007. 2007. In your lifetime, the first iPhone was invented and sold. Right? Do you know how radical that is? That our world has transformed entirely in the course of your lifetime with the way that technology is now available to us in a completely different way. I've been doing some thinking about technology and a little bit of writing about it as well, and trying to think about how our world has transformed. And I know that there's different views about this. On the whole, I am excited about some of the possibilities that go along with the idea of the potential of what we have when we carry around these small computers with us, the information that's available to us. But we have to realize that these are sources of disinformation as well, that these are devices that are designed with particular ideas in mind. And some of perhaps maybe the more alarming people in our culture are warning us about the age of surveillance capitalism. Have you heard about this? The age of surveillance capitalism? Because, for a long time, the internet actually didn't have any monetary value in terms of the websites that you would visit. It was Google that figured out how to make money off the internet. And they do it really, really well. And they've taught everyone else how to do it as well. And so the things that they want to be able to advertise to you, and they want to be able to sell your information. They want to collect your information, and this is both people who make phones and especially people who make the apps on phones. This is how they make money. They make money through advertisements, and they make money through selling your information, which means they're collecting your information. So don't be confused, like all those games that are online, they are there to collect information about you that then becomes something that is sold to other companies so that they can market to you so that you will buy things. That's how the system works. And the name for it now is surveillance capitalism. And if that's the goal, if that's what companies are trying to do, then their objective is to keep you online on your phone for as much time as is possible. So if you've ever found yourself with your phone, and 100% I have found myself doing this, just sitting on the couch sometime, and I just start scrolling, and I'm scrolling, and I don't even, I look up, and an hour is gone. It's just gone. I don't even know what happened. I didn't learn anything. I was bored most of the time, but that hour's gone. And then I'll just look down and I'll just keep scrolling for another hour, right? And it's just, if you've ever found yourself in that situation, I don't know if you find this encouraging or scary, that's the phone doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's the app doing precisely what it was designed to do. New York University professor Tamsin Shaw says it this way. She says, the findings of social psychology and behavioral economics are being employed to determine the news we read, the products we buy, the cultural and intellectual spheres we inhabit, and the human networks online and in real life of which we are a part. So there's a book that I've read, it's by a Canadian scholar, Ronald Debert, who's written a book called Reset, Reclaiming the Internet for Civil Society, which actually describes our phones, this is the title of a chapter in the book, as toxic addiction machines. That's a title, right? Toxic addiction machines. And he actually quotes in this chapter from Sean Parker, who was the former president of Facebook. And he is quite open in an interview that he gave, saying that the like button on Facebook, which of course is now part of all these different apps, is designed to give users a little dopamine hit. That's the intent of the like button. And this is a quote from Sean Parker. He says, it's a social validation feedback loop. Exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. So I don't know if I'm freaking you out or not. I mean, truly, these devices are designed to get us online and to keep us online, and probably not think a lot while we're online, right? That's the point of them. And so this has me thinking about, we're talking in this series this semester about vocation, about hearing God's calling. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about distraction. Do we miss God's calling? That's one of the questions I want to engage today. So have you guys ever heard of the Screw Tape Letters? This is a book that C.S. Lewis wrote. It's my old copy, a picture of my old copy there in the corner. So the Screw Tape Letters, it's a really inventive book that C.S. Lewis wrote once. He's a very well-known Christian apologist and writer from a few decades ago, from the last century. He's English. And he wrote this one book, which is about a senior demon writing letters to a junior demon, trying to coach him and mentor him in how to get people into hell, because that's his goal, right? So Screwtape is the senior demon. Wormwood is his nephew, who he's trying to train, and he is teaching Wormwood the best ways in which to get people into hell. And this is a quote then from the Screwtape Letters about one of the ways in which he does this. And he's talking to Wormwood about distraction. So listen to this. As this condition becomes more fully established, you will be gradually freed from the tiresome business of providing pleasures as temptations. You will find that anything or nothing is sufficient to attract his wandering attention. You can make him do nothing at all for long periods. You can keep him up late at night, not roistering, but staring at a dead fire in a cold room. All the healthy and outgoing activities which we want him to avoid can be inhibited and nothing given in return, so that at least he may say, as one of my own patients said on his arrival down here, I now see that I spent most of my life in doing neither what I ought nor what I liked. What a line. I mean, this is fiction, of course. This isn't real, right? This is fiction, but what a line. I think I've gotten off of Instagram sometimes and thought that I just spent the last hour doing neither what I ought nor actually what I liked. I just did it. And so I'm I don't know if you're with me here, but I see this prevailing distraction as a part of our culture in a deep and new way, and it really actually concerns me. It concerns me. A lot of this is about myself, right? A lot of this is about how I live and the choices I make. But what about this distraction? One more person I just want to draw your attention to before we turn to Abraham. Andrew Sullivan, he's a writer, he's a journalist, published New York Magazine, published a number of his things, published in the New York Times, other places. This is already back in 2016. He wrote a very fascinating article where he confessed his technology addiction and actually went into a technology rehab place, right? It was a place where he completely separated off from society. He got rid of all of his technology, just went cold turkey, trying to reform his obsession. And if you listen to how he describes his life, we're talking extreme. It was wild. He had to have a completely new breakdown of everything happening on the web every 20 minutes. But these are a couple things that he writes in an article that he published as he came out of his time in this technology, reform center, whatever it was called. He said this: the reason and this is written by somebody who's not a Christian. This is just an American journalist, writing in this is a New York magazine, the New Yorker magazine. The reason we live in a culture increasingly without faith, it's not because science has somehow disproved the unprovable, but because the white noise of secularism has removed the very stillness in which faith might endure or be reborn. This is fascinating to me, and I'm not sure if this speaks to your generation or not. This is already a little bit dated in terms of when it was written. I think this was 2016. But he also says this. He says, if the churches came to understand that the greatest threat to faith today is not hedonism, is not seeking pleasure, but distraction, perhaps they might begin to appeal anew to a frazzled digital generation. I don't know if that hits home or not. I think there's something there. I'm not sure this is going to be a universal statement, but I think he's onto something. We live in a culture that seeks to distract us. And so I want to propose a thought experiment today. I want to do the what if, right? I don't know if you've seen Marvel's What If, where they imagine all these alternative scenarios. But here's my what if for us today. What if Abram had social media and an iPhone? Would Abram have heard God's call? And I don't mean to say that God can't accomplish his purposes with or without us. He chooses to do it with us, and God's omnipotence means that he is endlessly creative in what he can do. But amazingly, beyond my understanding sometimes, God chooses to work with us. And we see that in this very story, right? I think that Pastor G already read this, but it's worth taking another look. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And I'm not going to go into the whole Abraham story, but I just do want to, I want to point out, I have a map here. Remember this from Intro to the Old Testament. Do you have the next slide? Oh, here, I've got the next slide. I'm waiting for somebody else to. Here, this is a map of, right, this is like Saudi Arabia. This is Iraq, right? This is Iran up here. This is Iraq. This would be Syria up here. Here's Turkey. This is Israel. This is Palestine. This is where Abram is born, way down in southern Iraq. And his father, Terah, we're told about this in Genesis chapter 11, receives a call. And together his family travels up through Babylon, up through this, this is this really rich valley here of the Mesopotamian world, all the way up to Haran up here, which is kind of up in northern Syria. And I believe that Terah actually had the call to go down to Palestine as well. But he got distracted. He had family up in Haran. He got there, it was good, he settled. And so the word came to Abram again. And so then Abram heard God, and he eventually traveled down into this territory that we refer to as Israel or Palestine. Now, the promise that God makes to Abram has three elements. He promises land, he promises him descendants, that he will be a great nation, he promises him blessing. And interestingly, that through Abram, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And what we can see here is that Abram's obedience in this case is crucial for the fulfillment of the promise. Now, I'm not saying that God can't do what God's going to do, right? God's going to do what God's going to do. God has the power to do that. But here's something wild. He partners with us. He partnered with Abram. God made promises to Abram, but Abram had to listen. Abram had to trust, and Abram actually had to obey, right? His obedience is based on his trust that God will be true to his word. I really want to note this one thing. This is a slide that I actually have from a friend of mine, Tyler Williams, who's an Old Testament scholar. But nothing that Abram had done up to this point in his life merited this call from God. It wasn't like Abram was like some super guy that God was like, oh, you're the one, like you, it has to be you, you're the only one. We can tell from the names of his family that they were probably actually moon worshipers. They did not worship the Lord, okay? There is even stories and kind of these sort of Jewish apocryphal stories where Abram, before he leaves Haran, his dad Terah was actually somebody who sold idols. He had a whole shop making idols. This is in some, as I said, some Jewish apocryphal, some extra stories. And there's one story where Abram actually, right before he takes off for Israel, goes into his dad's shop and smashes all the idols. There's a story about that's in the tradition. It's certainly not in the Bible. So there's nothing, I don't think, special about Abram, other than he heard God's call, he trusted what God said was true, and he obeyed. And he obeyed, right? So what do we see here? We see that God calls, God speaks in God's promises, and God makes promises. And I don't believe that that's only for Abram. I believe that that is for us too. God is speaking. I think God's speaking all the time. God is speaking all the time. But what's required? We actually have to listen. Abram hears God. He listens. And then we see that he trusts what he hears is actually true. He believes it. And we see this a little bit later in chapter 15 of Genesis. The earlier passage was in chapter 12. But this applies here as well. He, Abram, believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. He trusted. He believed. And then that's not enough. He obeyed. He actually did what God asked him to do. right? So Abram went as the Lord had told him. Now, I don't want you to think that God's plans work in such a way that God has like the plan for you. And so that if you don't hear God when he says the right thing and you don't obey, then it's over, then it's done. Like you've missed it, you're screwed. I really don't believe it works that way. I believe that God's speaking to us all the time, and God's grace is beyond what we can fathom. And God will continue to speak and will continue to call. That doesn't mean that we can, we can actually choose not to listen in the end, right? We can make that choice. But there are all kinds of ways in which God can redeem our lives as we choose to listen. When Jesus tells the parable of the sower, I'm not sure if you remember that one, but it's a parable where he's talking about a sower sowing seed, and then he interprets his parable for the disciples. You can find it in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus does actually say, he says, some of the seed was thrown on the ground and it took root, but then there were thorns that grew up, and the thorns that grew up choked the seeds. And when Jesus explains this is in Matthew 13, verse 22, he says, as for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. Sounds a lot like distraction to me. I think it can happen, but God gives you chance. Like God is speaking all the time, and his grace is such that you have every opportunity to listen. Every opportunity to listen. So, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the nature of faith. In Greek, this word is pistis. Sometimes in Greek, there's, like we only have one word for love, but in Greek you have lots of words for love. And so we have to kind of condition what we mean by love by which Greek word it is. But it goes the opposite way with faith. For us, we have lots of different words for faith. We talk about trust, about confidence, and even belief, but there's only one Greek word that captures all of these ideas. It's this pistis. And so we have all these different things. So what does it mean to trust? What does it mean to have faith? Well, it means to have this confidence that what God tells us is true. And part of this then as well is realizing that God is the one who is faithful. That God is the one who is loyal to you, right? That he's fundamentally reliable. And that this is what we base our faith upon. And so we really are talking about trust. And every time you're talking about trust, every time you're talking about faith, this is relational. It's a relational term. Trust is a response to what someone has said. So I just want to encourage you, right? This is relational. This means that to hear God, you have to be in relationship with God. And if you're not sure what that means, what that looks like, I really, really encourage you. Talk to me, talk to Pastor G, talk to somebody. We want to share with you what that looks like. And I just want to point this out as well, that Paul, this is in the book of Romans, he sees this trust that Abraham exhibited as foundational for everyone, that this is the way we connect with God. Okay, so here's my last question for today. How do we build this kind of trust? How do we build this kind of faith today in an age of complete distraction? Right? In the day where I can sit down on my couch with Instagram and not even know that an hour has gone by. I love this quote from Mark when Jesus is offering to heal someone. And Jesus said to him, if you're able, all things can be done for the one who believes. And here's that Greek word, the one who has pistis. And immediately the father of the child cried out, I believe, I have faith, I trust. Help my unbelief. Help me to trust more. It's a prayer straight from the Bible. We can pray this. I want to tell you just a little bit about, within the Christian tradition, there are these things that we call disciplines, spiritual disciplines. And spiritual disciplines, sometimes they can sound really legalistic and sound like things that kind of are make all these rules about faith. And I just want to say this, that spiritual disciplines are not about how you get into relationship with God. That's about trust that's based on grace. But spiritual disciplines are ways in which, a lot of you are athletes. I know you guys are athletes. You don't just go out and just play. Nobody just, decides, hey, I'm running the marathon this week. Can you imagine me? I'm running the marathon this week. Like that, no, that's not going to happen. If I ever decide to do that, which I won't, I would have to train for years probably before I was able to do that, right? I know that the soccer players here train. This is off season, and I know you guys are working crazy hard right now, training for when you're back in season. Nobody aims to hit these goals without training. There's training in the Christian life as well. And that training, the whole tradition has told us, they're called spiritual disciplines. So I just want to tell you about one today that's relevant here. And this is the discipline of silence. Silence is exactly what it sounds like. It actually means not speaking. It means actively listening. Actively listening. Quote from Ecclesiastes, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Come to God ready to listen. How do we do it? I'm going to just give you a couple of suggestions. In order to practice silence, you also need solitude. And these are two disciplines in the Christian tradition that go together, silence and solitude. And I'm actually talking about being by yourself. I know it's very hard on a college campus, but there are ways in which you can do this. I'm talking about actually being by yourself and being silent. That doesn't mean having headphones and listening to music and just being on your own. It means really finding time to be by yourself with no distractions, right? There's lots of ways you can do this. Sometimes you can just find a quiet space where you can do this for a period of time. Sometimes you need to be outside, be walking somewhere. Roberts is a big campus. Past the door, all the residences in North Campus, there's lots of trails out into the forest there. There's places on campus even where you can do this, right? And so being silent is actually one of the times we hear from God. And when you are silent, it encourages you to actually be in the moment. And we don't have time to look back at it, but I don't know if you remember the story of Elijah in the Old Testament where he won this great victory over the prophets of Baal, and then he ran out into the wilderness and he eventually found himself on the mountain of God, and he begged for this encounter with God. And first, when he was standing on the mountain waiting for God to show up, there was a hurricane, and there was a fire, and there was an earthquake, and yet God was not in those. God was in the sound of sheer silence in that encounter, right? So actually being silent is important. And there's a reason why we don't like to be silent. As soon as you take it all away and you sit, you're with yourself in a scary way. Because all those things, I'm telling you about myself, maybe you can, whether this fits with you or not, I don't know. But when you sit with yourself, all those things you don't like about yourself, they're the first things that come to mind. And they just bubble up. And it's hard to be with yourself thinking crappy thoughts, right? It's revealing. Sitting by yourself in silence tells you about yourself. So you need to find some space where you can be alone. You need to expect when you try to be silent that your thoughts are going to be radically chaotic. Whenever you try to be silent, always bring with you a piece of paper and a pen, because crazy thoughts are going to come at you about every single thing you have to do and everything you've ever thought about other people. And you just need to write it down so that you can silence it. If you do this after 15 minutes usually, you can actually get to a point where your brain calms down and you can be silent. And this is the time when you probably are going to be convicted. But remember grace, God is gracious always. And I want to teach you two practices. Number one, I want to encourage you this, especially as we come to the end of term. Consider a social media fast. We just came through the period of Lent, the period of fasting. Try to go off social media for like a week and just do it even as an experiment. Does that change anything? Does life look different? Are you as distracted as you were? Use that silence for prayer. If you don't pray, even like learning the Lord's Prayer and saying it and then waiting in silence for God to speak, really important. And I want to teach you one contemplative prayer. This is called palms down, palms up. This is where you come before God and you start off, you're actually sitting down, you literally put your palms down. And you just think about all the anxieties and concerns that you have, and you let them all bubble up. You let them all come to the surface. And if you need to, you write them all down. And after each one, you're just, God, I give it to you. God, I release this anxiety to you. God, it's yours. You just keep giving it away. And when the silence comes, and it will come, might take a while. Some of us have a lot of anxieties. I have a lot of anxieties. It takes a while. But when the silence comes, you turn your palms over. It's like a physical response. You declare what you need from God, and then you just sit in silence and wait. Sit in silence and wait. I know we've been talking about vocation a lot this semester, and trying to find your place in the world, and this is so, so important. I've heard God speak to me. I think God speaks to me a lot. I don't think I hear it all, but I've had moments in my life where I have heard God speak. It isn't always the word that I wanted. The one that was completely vocational, I could remember exactly where I was standing, exactly the moment that it occurred. And God said to me, no, your plans are not my plans. And I had to listen, and I actually had to give up. I changed my major, I changed my career path, I changed everything. And yet God has been faithful through that journey. I am so thankful he spoke, and I am so thankful that I listened. But I'm really concerned that if we don't give up the distractions, we aren't going to hear. And it's my prayer for you today that you will hear God when he speaks. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for these students. Thank you for the ways that you are working in their lives. God, thank you that you speak to us. God, continue to speak. And God, please give us ears that we might hear. Give us hearts that are willing to trust. And God, help us, help our wills, help our desire to obey what you call us to do. And through it all, Lord, give us your peace. Thank you. Go with God, everyone. Amen.